Folks, TMBS 163, the day after election 2020, the one-term tantrum, as I call it in the title, and the Suburban strategy equals down-ballot disappointment, and, all sorts of different storylines that are coming into shape as we speak. Joining me, Alicia Brooks.
Hello, hello.
David Griscom.
How is it going, y'all?
Great question, David.
Does this fall under fool me once, shame on you?
I don't know. What do you guys have? What are your thoughts about yesterday?
From the top of my head, there were moments last night when I felt we were having a replay. I think it's a bit different this time than what we saw, and I think we'll get into why exactly. But it's definitely. I think this election, just as the 2016 election is just like so unprecedented. I think we got a lot of signals that contemporary wisdom, especially what we were being fed, was just proven to be wrong. And anyone who does this kind of commentary stuff, you have to take a moment and question yourself and what you were thinking going into this. For me, I had a lot of doubts about the strategy going into the Biden campaign. We've been talking about that for the past few months. I didn't think it would be as disastrous as this. And I think there's a lot of lessons that need to be learned for sure.
I think corn pop might still pull through.
Yeah, just to tease that out, like the strategy of going to the suburbs, very clearly what Biden did. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, look, I'm not precious about politics. Like, I think if you think that's where the path to the most power is, I think do it. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're going to trade off certain votes in certain areas, like the Biden did, like Miami-Dade was the early one, right? They said, well, we're not actually super worried about low turnout in like the Black and Latino communities in that area because we kind of wrote them off because of 2016, frankly. Mm-hmm. And they doubled down. And if you're going to do that, like from my perspective, because you're running these races, you're also sort of cultivating democracy as much as and Democrats only think of this as managing it, right? Yes. So in a managing democracy perspective, fine. If you can beat Trump with like 300 electoral votes through the suburban strategy, then you know what you're telling the left to take a back seat is like, because if you win without us, like, okay, I get it. If it's a squeaker, then we got serious problems here. And the serious problems aren't, I think people need to be careful about how they contextualize this, because there was a massive turnout in a lot of places here, right? Like people turned out for this election. Mm-hmm. But you also have things like it's COVID. You have, so people might be more engaged. People are definitely engaged to vote against Trump, but I don't think people shouldn't be surprised at how many people would vote for him too. I'm kind of getting in shambles here, but I don't know. Pick up on that, one of you.
Yeah, I think I said last week when we were making our predictions, I thought Biden was going to win by a larger margin, but kind of everything else feels exactly according to plan in terms of just the general confusion, chaos, Trump proclaiming victories. Like a lot of this, I think in 2016, we were all like deeply shocked. Last night, I didn't even watch until like 9 p.m. Like I was just like, whatever, it's going to take forever.
Right.
I've just been thinking so much about, Gore versus Bush. Like that is where my mind is at. When do you think we'll see actual presidential?
We might. People. I don't know if Matt, you have the chat handy or anything like that, but I think we might even see some news while we're going. Not necessarily about Pennsylvania. I think that's going to be a few days.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I want to finish the thought. I said like Biden might win, and it looks like he actually might win in a big enough margin that puts it out of a GOP court contest, even if they wanted to for Trump, if they want to run that play. But the key disaster here is down ballot.
Yeah.
And what should people expect when you're saying, hey, it's Trump is the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Because all you're doing is giving license to Republicans to, okay, vote Biden at the top of the ticket and then Republican all the way down. And like, I think we touched on that a little bit here, but knowing what I know now, it would have definitely been a major point of emphasis of the critique on that whole project. Because I think we saw the disaster that maybe if you want to get into Texas now, but yeah, I mean, just brutal.
I mean, I think Texas is obviously it's something that's, near and dear to me, but it's one of those states, I think, that there's going to need to be a very serious reckoning with the strategy. And I've said for a very long time that I think the people who run the Texas State Democratic Party are absolutely incompetent. I think that we've seen it time and time again. And, people were really banking on this kind of Beto strategy to sort of like lean into the suburban districts that Beto was able to pull. And we've seen that really, really failed. And I think there's a lot to talk about, specific like groups and where they went. I think what happened in South Texas, especially with the Hispanic vote, and it should be made clear to people, because I think some people do get confused. It's not that this vote, switched overwhelmingly to Trump. It's that the margins, very much, flipped, and they weren't that large at all. And I'm going to pull up this tweet real quick from Jessica Cisneros, who ran a pretty good campaign earlier this year. She ended up losing the primary, but it's somebody who's very much like an activist in the state, who makes the point, many talking about South Texas, specifically the Rio Grande Valley. You can't expect Latinx working folks to turn out for Dems if you're not going to invest and fight. Locals have been saying a ton of votes are up for grabs, and it was true. This happened because many voters didn't feel fought for. And when we talk about investing, we mean resources and implementation of good policy. It's also important to note that people didn't vote for Trump because he's bipartisan. They voted for him because he delivers, albeit detrimental policy to the area, but delivers. And again, she shouts out, which I think is also important as we're having this reckoning, to shout out the incredible work that a lot of people were doing despite the interference that we were seeing from, the national party, and specifically in Texas too, the state party. But that strategy really fell on its face to turn the suburban, vote out. And I think, there's going to be a lot of lessons. And I think one of the primary ones is this really lazy strategy that the Democratic Party, especially like the elites, the DC punditry, these folks have been advocating for a long time, that like demographics in themselves are destiny. And that these, communities are just going to show up, and you don't have to fight for them. You don't have to provide for them. Hell, you don't even have to provide a vision about how, voting for Biden will directly, change and benefit their lives. I mean, that campaign was fundamentally a negative one, in the sense it was saying, Trump's bad and we're not Trump, right?
Yeah, negative in just not a moral sense, in like a just objective sense. It was negating Trump, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't because look, Joe Biden had a repeal of Taft-Hartley on his campaign website, so that to ban right to work. That was literally on his campaign website. Now, I didn't know that. And not only did I not know that, but Sam Cedar did not know that, right? And he's a person who, frankly, would know that, because guess what? They don't really run on that stuff. And yeah, I mean,
you're 100% right. And like, not to get too worked up about, little spats I was getting on Twitter with people, but I'm going to put up another really, horrific example of just how bad what happened in Texas was. So for all the talk, this is Evan Smith, who's at the Texas Tribune. For all the talk of Texas being in play at the presidential level, Joe Biden is on track to win the fewest counties, 21, of any top ticket Democrat in years. I think going back like 20 years or so, like maybe and you see, and then if you start looking, especially in South Texas, at the totals, those saw a huge move of people, who weren't basically shown for Biden. I think the Democrats thought that they, basically took for granted. And, I just said, like, you're never going to win Texas if you don't engage in actual politics, like the actual work of convincing people that, voting for you, supporting your policy, supporting your platform is going to, to help you out, because, materially, I mean, it's so frustrating because we're living through this crisis right now, this health crisis and this economic crisis, and everything that the Republicans are doing is making things worse. There's no doubt about it, right? But if you looked at the exit polls, the number one thing, especially with voters in these areas where the Democrats are really disappointed, people who flip from Trump, people were saying they're voting for, the economy because they felt that Donald Trump was better on the economy. Now, of course, there's a lot of nonsense, we have to work through there. A lot of times when rich people talk about the economy, they're talking about their stock portfolio. But I'm going to make a point that's going to be very unpopular with people. You have to understand that for all these people who have been suffering through this lockdown, they have seen a dramatic decline in their their income and their security. They're very worried about their future. And a lot of people, I'm not talking about the rich assholes, and I'm not even saying this was the majority of voters, but these are people you should be winning. A lot of those people who are sort of wanting for there to be a move away from lockdown to sort of reopen the economy fully aren't necessarily doing it because they're crazy anti-maskers or they deny the seriousness of COVID. They're doing it because they're worried about not being able to afford an apartment next month. They're doing it because they don't have economic opportunities because of the shutdown. And if you can't provide the counter narrative that basically what's going to happen, vote for the Democrats because we're going to put forward this massive stimulus plan. Look, I know on paper the Democrats are saying that's what they were going to do, but that was not what they were campaigning on. That was not what they were touching on.
Nancy Pelosi was muddling the whole stimulus message by saying we're not going to take the 1.8 because, and frankly, look, if you message it like we're going to keep states afloat and it's simply about that, but she was going on and on about different things she wanted, wish list items in the bill. And fundamentally, that's all the Republicans need to save their margins is things like that. They can say Nancy Pelosi is the one standing between you and another check from Donald Trump. Right. And it's their fault because she was. And guess what? She put herself in that position in the stimulus by giving away all the corporate bailout right up front without taking care of that stuff. So, yeah, it just doubles back to what I'm going to keep harping on is we need a change in leadership.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, what we're also seeing is that people are voting for progressive measures. And,
yes.
So they're just not associating the Democratic Party with being progressive. It's like what does this party represent and who's it for? We had a projection of what we thought that was, and now we're learning it's no longer even like the shell of a ghost of what we thought it stood for.
I think the Senate candidates particularly are showcase that. Striking out everywhere. Susan Collins, she was supposed to be dead in the water.
Wait. No, 100%. But before we move from Texas, I did also just want to highlight this because we saw a lot of negative, but there were serious positives, specifically in Austin, Texas. This is Greg Kazar, who is a city councilman in Texas, who's been, one of the spearheading of something we've covered a lot, which is the defunding of the police in that city, and also a lot of progressive measures. Austin Prop A, which is essentially like a citywide Green New Deal. That passed overwhelmingly. So we saw success for progressive candidates. And I will say too, the big races, the big Congress races that progressives ran in Texas that they ended up losing. I think it's a defeat that came, from a national defeat. But, in those cases too, we are seeing, the congressional districts that go through Austin, Texas specifically are designed to prevent any kind of Democrat from coming into power. So I think that it's fair to look at, a campaign like Mike Siegel's campaign and chalk up a significant amount to that, to, basically that gerrymandered district doing its job, but also, not getting the support that was desperately needed on the national level. But, there were some, there are some models that we can build out of. It's not all a disaster. But
the shrinking of the house, but the squad getting bigger is something we need to take seriously. Because Cory Bush is going to be great, and look at Max Rose getting just clobbered in Staten Island, or was it Long Island? I'm not sure. One of the two places, but that those people failed, and our little caucus. To the extent that it represents, we need to keep that. I don't know what's going to happen with the leadership, but I do know that to the extent that we can do, and David Dayen's talking about, maybe we can do something because of that. I don't know. Pelosi and Jeffries are two people that need to not be acceptable.
I know.
Maybe we can get that going. But I'm going to bring in Ben Burgis here.
Speaking of California, we had a few good things happen. Measure J passed, which is a good thing for our budget and our communities. felons can now vote. And I also believe, hopefully I'm correct, I think we got rid of cash bail.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of positive things that happened in the state of California. It looks like we're going to be getting rid of the devil incarnate, Jackie Lacey. So a couple of good local things.
No, not so good on Prop 22, unfortunately.
Yeah, and
I'm gutted about that.
When Ben gets on, that we should do that, because I think that's going to be a very significant one for a long time. I'd also just mention too, in Texas, I think one of the real disasters too was their failure to take at least increase, get some kind of lead in the state house there. Because what's going to happen is they're now going to be able to have Republican control. That's what it's looking at
in a lot of places. Yeah.
Well, but that also means just continuation of gerrymandering as we're entering a redistricting year, which is a devastating thing. But we got our friend Ben Burgis here.
Burgis.
The OG TMBS crew, author of Give Them an Argument and host of a podcast of the same name. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks, brother.
I don't, not to put you on the spot, but I think we should talk about Prop 22 in California, because there were a lot of losses last night, but I think that one is going to be very significant for the long term. For people who aren't familiar, I'm sure most of our listeners have, been following us talking about this for a while, but essentially what happened there is that Uber and Lyft and, those other gig companies were able to, through something like $200 million in spending, buy themselves, this campaign that is now going to force California to accept their despicable anti-worker definitions of, worker classification, which means for, Uber drivers, gig workers across the state, that they won't get the basic protections that we fought for 100 years ago. And I think we should frame it in that sense too, a struggle that we thought had been won 100 years ago, basically being overturned by these new tech companies who saying, oh, times have changed and we have to, things are progressing. Technology has, shifted everything dramatically and are now basically going to be able to undermine all those worker protections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in some ways, I know this is going to sound exaggerated, but I think in some ways it's actually the most important thing that was decided yesterday, because if you think like one of the I always thought that like one of the best reasons why the left should care about the outcome of the presidential election was because of Trump's NLRB appointments and the effect those have on the terrain for labor organizing. But this, this is it's only statewide, of course, but this is an even bigger deal in the same sense, right? Because all of the things that you can imagine, like a bad reactionary National Labor Relations Board doing, as far as, this is something that unions can't do. This is something, workers aren't allowed to grieve or negotiate or whatever. Well, if you're not even classified as a worker, if there's this weird legal pretense that you're in some sort of different category, then you're not even in the game of being affected by any of that, right? And so I think that it's striking that this is so far under the radar, and it's like the biggest deal thing, at least for Californians, that happened. And certainly, if this happened more places, that would be the most devastating thing that could happen, for the prospects of working class organizing in the gig economy. And also it's really striking that it happened in California, because it tells you so much about the limits of that kind of liberalism, right? That it's such a blue state that it's like, you're going to hear lots from liberals about Biden's popular vote lead, which, you should, it's important, like it's a democratic principle. But also so much of that comes from California, which just voted, and I'm sure in many cases people weren't really clear on what they were voting for. The industry propaganda was very effective, But but the state that just voted to deny people the most basic labor rights, like you said, stuff that was fought for in in like the 1930s or earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Uber and Lyft are already touting it as a model for federal legislation, and nobody who saw our talk with Marshall Steinbaum from a few weeks ago would be surprised by that. I'm gonna just mute you quick, Ben, because I think we're getting some white noise from. Nope, not Ben. Who are we?
Is it
Not.
me?
Yes, it is. It is you. It might be your computer. Is it? Maybe the fans are a bit loud. Sorry, I muted you. Uh, but anyway, where were we? Sorry.
No, I mean, I
Yeah,
think
so they've been touted as a model for federal legislation. You said.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think it's horrifying to think of what Biden and a Republican Senate are going to do in that regard, particularly the way this is sold as like, this is a way to give people rights. And then the asterisks are rights that are smaller than the rights that they actually should be getting. And yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean,
one big too, and I think the
Yeah.
propaganda fight is also discouraging. Like the highly technological way of like, every time you use this app, which is made by a company that's losing money and just propped up by venture capital. Like, I mean, it's just such an assault on the political system.
Oh,
Really.
yeah, and it's such a naked power grab because this is all stuff that when it comes to stuff like longshoremen was decided literally, as David said, a century ago or more, and I mean, I guess technically less for some of the big labor legislation in the 30s, but this was stuff that was being fought about a full century ago, and we decided like legislatively that no, you can't, like you can't do these practices. This is just a basic thing about the sort of like rights and dignity that all working people should have. And then these gig economy companies like Uber and Lyft, they presented it initially as if this were just somehow a feature of the technology itself, that it was creating this way of organizing the economy. And then, of course, slowly, eventually, in some places like California, courts started to say, well, hold on, guys. That doesn't make sense. That there's no reason, there's no difference in principle, right? Between a setting, like longshoremen or instruction or other things where you could make a decision on a day-to-day basis about who to bring on to a given job. And this, it's the platform is different, but that's not relevant. And then, because belatedly, finally, labor law was being enforced a little bit against these companies, then they started throwing around their money to get it scaled back, so it wouldn't be anymore. And it's particularly, I think, depressing. Not like Matt said. I'm sure it's the case that lots of people who are voting for it, right? It was presented in this super misleading way. Lots of people, I'm sure, didn't quite realize what they were voting for. But I think the more significant thing is that like progressive institutions in California weren't making this a higher priority thing.
Or even complicit in it, I think, to an extent, right?
Actually, and can I bring this up real quick? This is from Marshall Steinbaum, who's responding to somebody, making the point about how the New York Times was covering this, basically saying, New York Times coverage of Prop 22, drivers will remain independent as opposed to enslaved. And Prop 22 will remake labor laws. Hooray. And Marshall says, gig economy workers are not and never were independent. The whole business model is based on controlling their every move. Independent contractors, the legal classification the platforms make use of to evade their responsibilities to the workers they control. And I'm just going to highlight this. I haven't listened to it, so you never know. But Jeremy Rapinich, who is a restaurant editor with Rob Report, said that in LA, the local NPR station framed the victory for Prop 22 as a victory for social justice.
That's that thing with the I forget what it's called, right? The Harvard shit we were talking about with Marshall.
Yeah.
Like that is, it's talk about the failures of, previous generations of organizing and who it left out, but don't really actually ameliorate that or bring those people up to code, just create a new class for them. I mean, and that use of independent, it reminds me of a tweet I saw very recently by Burger King UK.
That is a good one. Do you have that, Andy?
Which is Burger King UK said, we never thought we'd be saying this, but order from McDonald's. We never thought we'd be asking you to do this, blah, 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 or support Pizza Hut, Five Guys, Greg's, Taco Bell, Papa John's, or any other independent food outlet. Too numerous. Like, hey, you want to go meet me at the independent food outlet? Like, what is this? Independent? What are you?
What?
Yeah, like this terminology is hilarious to me. Like the Declaration of Independence from food corporations. Like, we're not part of the state. Like, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like QAnon thing, probably.
It's not a Labor Party run Nando's.
I'm not surprised. Is my sound less hellish?
No,
okay.
You're good.
I did a full tech run through. I'm really disappointed about what happened with Prop 22, but I'm not at all surprised because early on when I was posting about it on social media, really progressive voters were messaging me like why are you saying no on 22? And like almost like upset. And so the propaganda is something we should look at because it was wildly effective. And it's like even like people that like follow DSA-LA or like are a little tuned in, like until they explicitly had the mandate to say no, we're just like completely like, oh, why are you anti-supporting drivers?
It's such a big fire hose the way that they can, target people, right? Like that's like a little voter activation app in people's pockets. I mean, I don't know, like I haven't used a lot of these apps since COVID. Occasionally I would, and I mean, I can imagine what a person who isn't following this stuff closely thinks when they see that, right?
Like help drivers.
Because
exactly.
Yes.
And that's how they framed it.
Yeah.
I mean, really, in some ways, I think it's like we're just lucky that when the right wing came up with the "right to work" slogan for anti-union stuff, that this happened long enough ago that that labor unions played a bigger role in the Democratic Party back when that happened. So like at least liberals were used to being against that. Because honestly, I think that if they came up with it right now, with the contemporary Democratic Party, then I think like, maybe on an institutional level they'd be against it, maybe, right? But they would, but yeah, I think you get a lot more of these kind of, low to medium information liberal voters being like, oh yeah, gives right to work, giving workers rights. That sounds good.
And I mean,
low to medium liberal voters, like the most chilling insult. Oh, imagine being called that or knowing you were that. Oh, dark times.
Well, I mean, I would just add though that, I think it's really important that we never fall into the trap of, blaming voters in general. Like these are people who, these systems are like, setting themselves up. The reason Uber and Lyft spent $200 million was to deceive people. And they were trying to use people's like good intentions, saying like, oh, you know what? I am worried about my driver. I want to make sure that they have a, income, a guaranteed income, which was a big part of the campaign, if I'm not incorrect on what people were, being told. But, but when they said guaranteed income, they were only including the actual time that you had a passenger in your car or were driving to pick them up, not the, countless hours that you're spending around waiting to get a call, right? Which any kind of basic definition of, these people as workers for the corporation Uber would include that as timed work. I mean, who wouldn't consider that to be a time that you're working? So it's just like, it's important for us as we're going forward. I mean, hell, it's going to be tough to fight this, because they have that draconian, 7/8 supermajority needed to, I mean, I'm not like a legal scholar or anything like that, so I can't opine too much on it, but I feel like you have to challenge that on some level legally. It's just an absurd measurement.
Ridiculous.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I should say it been clear, right? I mean, medium information voter isn't an insult. I mean, like that's, I think that's what people, like that's reasonable, right? Like, I don't think it's a reasonable expectation that like every random person who is working all the time and has other things to worry about is all over this stuff. I just think that the fact that people who have that kind of like medium level of information, they know what Prop 22 is, but they don't really understand what it is, that they wouldn't necessarily be against this. I do think it says something about the Democratic Party and about progressive institutions, because trust me, if there was a proposition on the ballot in California to somehow, I don't know, make it more difficult to get an abortion, and they had some really misleading wording for that, and the propaganda was really like deceitful, every single medium information liberal voter would know that it was bullshit, because they'd be all over it, right? I mean, that's
proposition to ban pantsuits.
I mean, I think on this note, like there's the bot association with Obama people, right? Like Pluff, and I'm sure he's not the only one that went to work for one of these companies that's benefiting from this. And so you have, I know we associate Obama with like a nefarious person that shivved Bernie in the primary. But most people aren't up to speed on that yet. And so like you see like these Obama people and like, oh, I can get a taxi straight to my house. Then people like buy that. And I mean, it is crazy how it's disgusting actually, how Obama let his people do that with a lot of these companies. And like in 2016, they had an exclusive deal with the rideshare companies at the convention in Philadelphia that they could get at a certain like express lane. I mean, this party is completely corrupt in the matters of like these companies, how can we stop it? Especially when Biden's going to be giving away all this stuff to Josh Hawley, the friend of workers, who thinks also that unions are too corrupt to really allow it to flourish.
Josh Hawley doesn't actually that's be a very different tangent, but the bar for right-wing populists is set at like nothing. Literally, like people think that like Steve Bannon is an economic populist, and like the main piece of evidence for that is
he's a Leninist.
He wants to like nudge the tax code back up to like something closer to what it was in the Clinton years. But I do want to say on the Obama point that I mean, really, you can't underestimate that sure, we think of Obama as somebody who shivved Bernie during the primaries, but I would be very surprised if even most Bernie voters thought of him that way.
Yeah.
I think there are tons of, I mean, look, AOC even said something recently about how Obama was doing the best that he could, the Republicans who are stopping him. And I'm not bringing that up to dunk on AOC. I just think that it's an incredibly pervasive idea that's out there, which is kind of a depressing thought, because Biden, if things are the way they look, that Biden is going to become president and McConnell is still going to control the Senate, then Biden's going to have the same excuse for the next 4 years. And it's not just an excuse. I mean, there are obviously Republican obstructionism is very real, but also it lets him get away with murder, because every time he doesn't do something, they can always blame it on the Republicans.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And God, it's just so disgusting. And I'm sure like you have more firsthand experience with it than us, Leisha. Like the scope of the misinformation campaign in California is like very frightening.
Yeah, I mean, I was just surprised by it, and then I don't know, I feel like what happened was when Michael first died, I sort of had leeway to just be like really aggressive and intense with people, and then like as the weeks went by, people were like, relax. I won't get into the anyways, but I was messaging, and I would have friends send me stuff, and then I would send them like 4 articles and like a video. I was just like so aggressive about it, and I was so I don't know, just like really disappointed, because I just thought that there was enough information out there to combat the propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly disheartening and terrifying. And yeah, I have of course they're going to make this a federal legislation. Why would they not? But congratulations on your Lyft portfolios going up. Stocks are up 20%, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Oh yeah. I mean, even though those companies still have yet to come anywhere near profitability, and their whole business model
doesn't matter. The market's
it does it for them.
That it's fine.
I mean, they figured it out.
Yeah.
No, I mean, devastating, and it, just for people who are curious, because I was curious. It passed with 58%, 6.7 million votes, which is a significant, group going forward. Do y'all have anything else on that before we get into any of this other like?
Um, I'm trying to think, were there any good measures or propositions that you guys are happy about that you've heard of passing elsewhere? I know Florida passed a minimum wage.
Yeah, actually, we should do that for a second. I mean, not the. I mean, yeah, that was huge, and I'm gonna be very curious what Matt has to say about
Come
this
back,
too.
Matthew.
But he's just fixing his video.
I'm here. I'm here just making sure we don't cover
Oh
Ben
yeah.
up with the logo the whole time.
It's fine. They know what we look like. It doesn't matter.
I wanted to bring this up because I think it's really interesting, and it definitely, was trending on Twitter last night. But like, despite, for example, what we saw in Florida, yeah, as Alicia was just mentioning, push for a minimum wage increase. There's been a lot of people who have been fixated on these results here from this Fox News poll, and I think we should talk about this because it is very interesting, and I think it paints a picture that we should learn from, right?
Yes.
So. I'll just go through some of them quickly. Changing to a government-run healthcare plan strongly favor 39%, somewhat favor 33%. I mean,
that's what's called a 2/3 majority.
And that's a super majority. Supreme Court action on Roe v. Wade, leave as is, overturn it. I mean, 71% leave as is.
Half of those are Republican operatives being like, "Hey, that's a good campaign issue."
U.S. gun law should be more strict, less strict. More strict is 55%, less strict is 12%, keep as is 33%. Should there be a pathway to citizenship?
Nice.
72% believe so. 28% believe in deportation. I mean, there's like they go on and on and on to see a couple of these because they're pretty wild. This is huge.
That last one, I mean, that's really worth underlining, circulating like a couple times because there's so much bullshit out there in circulation about how like, oh, it's just like liberal elites who want that, the solid, salt of the earth people, like they want to, they support like Trumpist immigration policies.
Yes,
every poll ever, it's just total nonsense.
Particularly if Biden is in charge of ICE now.
Yeah. And just before we close these, because they're really wild. I mean, how concerned are you about climate change? Very concerned, 46%, somewhat 26%, not too much and not too at all. Both would be combined to be only 28% of people polled. It's just, I mean, and you can go through, and there's so many of these. Actually, this one's a good one too. Increasing
what
government.
were they saying during all this? That's like I saw these screenshots too, but I'm curious, like.
Yeah, that would be a good.
Why did they continue the segment?
Because it's just like a dunk. But I mean, I think there's a real lesson to learn there because like there's been this point that people have been like, how stupid do you have to be to vote Republican and believe in this? It's like that's a failure of the Democratic Party to not
100%.
own those issues. And they ran from them. This whole campaign was literally about running from those issues and say like, oh, I'm going to still keep doing fracking. Oh, I don't want, to have like a robust immigration plan. No, we don't want, I mean, Joe Biden, I will veto Medicare for all if it comes to my desk. I mean, these things are extremely popular. And it's worth noting that as we're like looking at this disastrous result last night, to make the point that this kind of democratic strategy that like the way to win is to create the most boring, wishy-washy politics where you don't really stand for anything and you push back against anything positive, in my opinion, that your party or movement is supposed to represent is not a winning strategy. You don't get rewarded for it. In fact, you get hurt by it. I mean, if you were actually out there advocating for Medicare for all in a pandemic, I think we'd be having a different conversation. Hell, if you were seriously talking about a Green New Deal with a just transition, a very robust one that you articulate as like a forefront of the transition, you would do a lot better in Texas than they did. I mean, it's just like their timidness to try to own these issues, which are extremely popular, is a real travesty.
And it's the donor. I mean, how much do we just place that on the donor veto?
I think a big part, I mean, I said this on Ben's stream last night. I think people really need to understand how these parties work. And you have an apparatus of people, some of them are just stupid and they don't have, but they have like intentions at least, right? They think that the only way to win in politics is by doing this like stupid, middle of the road politics. But the vast majority of people who are, roles in the party are like fundraising first. That's how they measure success. It's not necessarily about implementing policies and changing people's lives. It's saying like, okay, how much were we able to raise? How much was I able to keep this industry afloat? And this is a fact that people need to really understand. These past few years have been a piggy bank for the Democratic Party. They can raise a crazy amount of money. I mean, look what they did in the Senate races, right? Both failures, but they were able to raise an incredible amount of money and pay pundits off.
It's my preferred argument about why to prefer Dems in power is just as opposition, the leadership just gets to fundraise and act like they're better. Like at least if you want to demonstrate it,
slush fund.
Yeah, like if you want to demonstrate they're the same, you want them in power because then they actually have to do the same things and not just like you're not just trusting your theoretical understanding of the Democratic Party.
Before we move on, or no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say real quick 2 things before we moved on. One, since David asked about good ballot measures, this is a pretty local one, but I also think it's a good, it's a small thing, but I think it's potentially a model for elsewhere. My friend Jeremy Salmon, who hosts the Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person podcast, mentioned to me today there was in Multnomah County, Oregon. There was like a universal taxpayer funded child care measure that was just passed. And so I think that's like a good like local model that could be emulated elsewhere. And
cool.
Honestly, sometimes I think it says things not necessarily good about the left that we talk so much about free college, which of course I support, and so little about free childcare, which is an issue for a much bigger part of the population.
I think
imagine both working together.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of. I mean, just speaking as somebody who probably talks about student debt, I think there's some self-interested reasons for why that emphasis is made.
No, I mean, whatever. Me too. But
maybe as we age as a cohort, I think maybe you'll see some more of that.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I also really like what David said about the about like doing that thing. It's like, oh, people must be so stupid, vote Republican, whatever. That it always. Like it's such a weird thing, and it seems to me that we've gotten more of it since 2016 than certainly I remember at any previous time in my life. This sort of blaming the voters, and I think it is really important to kind of get what's wrong with it. I always think about there's this famous Bertolt Brecht poem where he called Die Lösung, the solution, where he's making fun. He's living in East Berlin at this point, and the regime there, after there was like a big strike and they suppressed it, they put up these posters saying that people would have to work harder now to regain the confidence of party. And he wrote this poem that has this famous last line. Perhaps it would be simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another. And like, I always think of that, when I hear
so much of that
like going on about like, oh, these stupid voters who, don't understand their self-interest. Like, no, you need to do a better job of appealing to them. That's how politics works.
Right. I mean, this is what I always say about, you need to cultivate democracy. We're reaping what like all the criticisms that basically even before the left was the current left, when Obama was in office, criticizing the neoliberal turn of the Clinton administration, this is exactly what you would expect from like that move to the knowledge workers and stuff like that, right? Like we're reaping like a long-term plant basically by this party, and it's a failure. Yeah. So
speaking of what the people want, and I hate to go from Brecht to this, but having the first QAnon congressional lady boss, what does that mean for us?
I wonder about some of this. I mean, on the optimistic side, I guess I'll just take the optimistic side if some of you guys want to take the doom approach. But QAnon, I think like the coherence, I think that is the future of the Republican Party, first of all. Like I think that, but I think it, ultimately she's not like saying, hey, I'm the QAnon representative. That's not how she's branding, right? They go crypto and a bit sensible. I mean, I guess I can't get optimistic for that long because fundamentally I think like we're in it used to be, Alex Perine talks about this all the time, where like the GOP used to amp these lunatics up because they're beneficial to the party, but kind of keep them in their own pen. And now I think definitely infiltrated and beyond infiltrated, like taken over the party. And now you're getting even a new crop of insane people. So, I mean, optimistically, I hope that the incoherence of it, I think it is more incoherent than the Tea Party was as a message. And I hope that hurts them. I mean, that's my hope anyway.
I mean, I hope so too. Obviously, it's a very frightening conspiracy theory that has led to a lot of pain. I mean, it's not just a fringe belief. It's one that is actually like, actually like hurt people.
I mean, even just like alienating people from their families, like on a mass scale, right?
It's scary, not because I need to say this correctly so people don't sprint with it. There is no truth in the QAnon conspiracy, but what it's fundamentally rooted in is, an anti-elite, mentality, which there is, there's a reality in that, in the sense that like the elites are screwing us and the elites are bad, evil people, right? And we need to like struggle against them. And QAnon is just, it's like the Marx line, first as tragedy, then as farce, right? It's just like, instead of actually being able to articulate a politics nationally that is able to challenge this ruling elite, instead we get this really despicable, disgusting, nonsensical theory about, a cabal of Satanists, like pedophiles who are actually like running the show, right? Obviously that's not true at all, but like, people, I think you don't have to really pay too much attention to understand that in this society, if you're an average working person, you are being screwed on. You're being screwed by an elite, and the failure of like a vibrant left to be able to articulate a movement that is able to take that true grievance and instead allow the right wing to dominate that and allow them to create these wacky conspiracy theories to the benefit of a billionaire from New York City, who is definitely a pig and and a sexist and sexual abuser as well. I mean, it's absolutely despicable. It's also obviously is a frightening example of like the different realms of information that we're all living in this country. I agree with you, Matt. I hope that it's just able to be so disproven on its face that it sort of fizzles out. But it's a really frightening development. The right's ability to basically, benefit themselves from is disgusting.
And the Democrats' inability to counter it. I mean, this is just the classic example of Christine Pelosi. This Epstein case is horrific and the young women deserve justice. It is quite likely that some of our faves are implicated, but we must follow the facts and let the chips roll. Like, insane. I mean, man. What I can't think, who is that message to, Christine? Like, because first of all, it seems like they weren't implicated, because I'm wondering who exactly, like, I mean, Clinton obviously, but it seems like there should have been more implications with that Epstein case, and we were robbed of it because the guy was snuffed out in prison somehow anyway.
Oh, he killed himself. He leaned forward very hard against a small bed sheet.
He passively is no more. Yeah, he's a dead witness somehow.
Yeah, man. Actually, not to derail us, but Oregon, that was exciting. Decriminalizing drugs in the state, I think is
like Jersey too. I mean, that's the other thing is
DC legalized psychedelics. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Did DC? Yeah. Wow.
I thought just Oregon. It's DC too.
Oh, I might be wrong. Let me check.
I liked what Michael Pollan had to say about that.
What?
Michael Pollan was like, no one should be going to jail for this stuff, but you have to be so careful when you decriminalize because it will turn into capitalizing off of these drugs. And like, people can't just casually buy psychedelics and use them. Like, it's not just like, well, you all know this, but for like young kids, like the fact they'll be like advertised to and like pushed as a consumer product is potentially scary. I think all drugs should be legal, and I think like I'm so in favor of that. I just think that I'm scared of what companies might do for profit.
You have to include the market critique. I mean, I watched a really depressing documentary on like ayahuasca tripping and
how
basically
it's ruining the Amazon.
Yeah, white people going down there for like find themselves, and like a lot of them actually just need psychiatric help and end up like one of them was like literally like lynched by the community, but because he had severe problems and was like hitting people and like abusing people, right? And he thought he could sort it out by going to South America and taking these drugs. And like the people that live there like are getting sick of these sort of backpackers. So yeah, I think that's a total valid.
Yeah.
I mean-
so DC did do it. I'm looking at it now.
That's great.
Which actually more places have than I thought. It says, so the Washington Post says the nation's capital appeared to become at least the 5th jurisdiction in the nation with some form of decriminalized psychedelics, joining Denver, Oakland, California, Santa Cruz, California, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. I did not know that.
Wow, that's wild. I mean, look, I mean, that's all good. Well, I mean, like, I think, yeah, I agree with Alicia completely. It's like we should be, people should not be going to jail for having a trip, right?
No.
No.
And I think, what do you guys think about that? Is like, I mean, we've discussed the success in Austin of the, like, I guess the standard model now of defunding the police, but I think we need to look at these things as like, I mean, just the drug war. I mean, everyone's made this connection before, but the drug war, just taking that off of the plate of the cops as a way for them to like request funds. I mean, that's that's you don't have to sell people on that. People are already sold.
I think that's.
Well, I mean, and you saw in the race in Massachusetts a little while back, a couple months ago, whenever that was at this point, the primary that Joe Kennedy III was actually pushed, like, made that connection, but in the opposite direction, said we can't legalize weed because then that would remove cops' ability to use as a reason to like search people's cars and stuff. And at least
The worst Kennedy.
That's the he tweeted it out of.
Yeah.
Is that right? It's like that's why we're getting rid of it. You asshole.
Oh, yeah.
And Mackie. Who would have thought that the Kennedy would run against someone who had a more fun accent to do than the Kennedy accent?
Oh, I love
A
that he got
real
out
curveball.
Massachusetts by Maki. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of, he just tweeted it out, though. You know, we've been talking about the failures of last night. This is our, I'm saying this ironically, friends at Pod Save America.
Oh God, I love this.
This was so bad. And it was, and actually, if I could set this up real quick, this was in response to an article that was in Politico, I believe, or The Hill, you know, sort of, you know, reckoning with the disaster of last night, where, of course, who is to blame, but it is the socialist radical left, which made it impossible for the centrist Democrats to win their very compelling races. You know, for Congress. But anyways, John Favreau tweets, "Do we have problems? Of course we do. Let's figure them out together in private." And Katie Bake says, "Who is the we and the us here? Democratic strategists and organizers, of which I am one."
Awesome.
He just tweeted it out. You know, I mean, like, this is something that is just so important to remember about the Democratic Party. I mean, like, you know, people know him. He's obviously, you know, a big podcast host, but, you know, this was somebody who was very involved in the Obama administration. These people don't want your input and they don't want your criticism. They believe that these should all be silently made, that there should never be any reckoning. You know, let me just go for 1 second. It's absolutely disgusting to me that these people have been running a campaign with slogans saying like, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does, right? Like framing this as a life and death election, saying that everything's on the line, right? And then failing tremendously. Like, look, it looks like Biden might eke out, you know, the win or whatever, but this was a disastrous night for the Democratic Party in the middle of an economic crisis and a health pandemic. That they were unable to walk away with this by large margins is a failure of that party, right? And they're sitting here.
Just to interject for half a second, David, it also like totally puts to rest the whole debate about electability, because my God, if he's maybe going to skate to 270 just by a hair, in the middle of a plague and the depression caused by the plague, imagine what would have happened without COVID.
No, I mean, exactly. And it's just like, you know, for them to frame this as serious as an election as it was, right? And then now to say, okay, but like, let's keep our criticisms in private and let's also make sure that they are closed doors with only, you know, party elites. It's disgusting. This party is a joke and it doesn't represent people in this country. And that's why we're fighting so hard to find an alternative and to build a different kind of movement, because this won't work. They don't care about you and they don't want to include you in their vision of the future. They want to manage you, as we've been saying. The Democratic Party wants to manage voters. They don't want to expand their electorate, and they don't want any kind of political movement to come in that's able to really invigorate the mass of people to demand change. They want to be able to manage their voter base and maintain their kind of social and political and economic power for themselves.
I mean, I think we need an accounting of, the Rick Schneider endorsement as just a little emblem of this. What the hell are we doing if you're saying Republicans are this? Well, first of all, the big problem is it was occasionally Republicans are that, but usually it's just Trump is this. We've kind of been through this already, I guess, but just really despicable. I saw somebody upset that Flint, the Genesee County that Flint is in, wasn't a bigger margin. It's like, was Rick one tough math nerd or whatever the hell his ad is on Twitter? Was he supposed to turn out more suburban voters, or were the people just supposed to ignore that the guy who poisoned them supports your guy now because Trump is uncouth?
Yeah.
You guys haven't drank Flint water?
Yeah. And my God, remember how remember all of the way that they carried on. About how terrible it was that Bernie Sanders accepted the endorsement of a podcaster. This is the guy who poisoned Flint's water, and he was embracing the endorsement from him. And of course, if we really go back into the Wayback Machine, I'm old enough to remember when the liberal line was that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney weren't just regular Republicans. They were this horrible new threat that decent Republicans were against. That's what liberals were all saying back then. And now all of the Bush era Republicans have become the reasonable Republicans the liberals will appeal to. That's what Project Lincoln is. That's what, multiple people who have been vetted apparently by Biden's transition team for possible cabinet appointees or, Bush era Republicans. So I'm pretty sure, the same way that, they were upset at, they used to hate Bush. They very recently hated Snyder. By 2028, maybe 2032, we'll be hearing rhetoric from liberals about, reasonable Republicans like Donald Trump
and this new QAnon TikTok kid,
like they say.
Yeah.
So now that Papa B has been brought up, not Ben, Bernie, what are you guys thinking in terms of now that we know who voted where? Do you want to get into the whole how we think things might have shaken out had it been Bernie versus Trump?
Ooh, I think it's hard to say, but I think the disaster in Texas, for instance, would be different. I think Nevada wouldn't be close, obviously. That's the thing about Hillary in 2016 just ignored the warning signs of Michigan. And it's like, oh, we're fine. Let's just do what we've been doing. And it seems like Biden did the exact same thing with Nevada, that just not going to care about just getting crushed by specifically Latino voters in that state. And yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think what David said earlier was spot on about how Medicare for All would have played, because Bernie Sanders probably more than any other major candidate is totally associated with one issue, which is Medicare for All. I think most people on a free association test, we all Medicare for All, Bernie Sanders, and so given that was his defining issue. If he had been the nominee during an unprecedented health crisis when millions and millions of people were losing their private health insurance, I have to think that it would have just been a pure referendum on that. And that's not to say that it's, look, when I say, and I'm sure people can dig up, I've said at least 10,000 times since 2016, Bernie would have won. When I say that, that's not a projection of some sort of weird metaphysical certainty about what would have happened in that timeline, because we can't know that. You're totally right now, right? There are 1,000 things that could have come up to mess with that, or there are lots of ways that might not have happened.
Unconvinced party that you have to drag kicking and screaming to support what you actually support might be a liability in the general, for instance, right?
Totally.
They would do everything they could to destroy him in the general,
right?
The Democratic Party.
That said, I still think, I think the more complicated thing that's being narrowed down to a few syllables when you said Bernie would have won is that is that Bernie would have been a generally stronger candidate, all else being equal, than Hillary was, or that Biden, has been. And I think that's just true, right? I mean, like so much of the suspense in the last 24 hours has been about Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these same states that Hillary screwed up in 2016. And it just seems undeniable that like a candidate who didn't have a history of supporting the trade deals that decimated the Rust Belt, that everybody there knows decimated the Rust Belt, and who generally had policies that would have played better there, would have inspired more Democratic votes. Now, would have inspired more people in traditional Democratic constituencies in cities like Detroit and Flint and Milwaukee, to Philadelphia, to come out and vote. I think that's definitely true. Now, whether overall, right, like everything else that happened in that timeline would have meant that he didn't win, who knows? Like he might not have. I mean, like look at what happened in the UK with the information we now have about the way that centrists and the Labour Party were self-consciously sabotaging Jeremy Corbyn during the general election. I mean, I'm sure we would have seen tons of that stuff, and maybe it would have worked. I mean, maybe he would have lost, but he would have been, all else being equal, in a better position to win, is I think the core of truth there.
I feel like I'm much more confident actually saying about 2020 than I am about 2016 that Bernie would have won. I think it's 100% correct that the Democratic Party would do everything that they could to destroy Bernie Sanders in this election, right? They would have undermined him. They would have, prevented him from having the kind of information that they needed. But hell, from what we're seeing, it seems like the information they had was bad from the get-go. So it might have been a beneficial thing.
We're going to withhold our shitty information from you.
But on every measure, all of the first of all, the Bernie Sanders strategy, I think the real lesson that we have to learn, actually, it was not the best strategy to win a Democratic Party primary, but I think it would have been a hell of a good strategy to win a general election. Because the thing is, with a Democratic Party primary, is primarily wealthier voters and people who are very attached to the Democratic Party brand. So the arguments that he wasn't a Democrat were very effective.
Plus, I mean, so much of the argument for Bernie winning the general election was based on the idea that he would activate voters who wouldn't necessarily come out. And a general election is a completely different thing from a primary there. I was talking to Megan Day about this earlier today, right? I mean, we both canvassed for Bernie in Nevada. I mean, she did way more than I did, but and tons of working class people who have like jobs and families and lives and aren't obsessed with it like weird people like us are, right? Don't even know what date their state's primary or caucus is.
Yeah.
Like Megan was telling me, she'd talk to people who'd be like, who are you going to vote for in the primary? The Democrat, right? They just don't know, because you have to be a little bit more plugged in. Whereas with the general election, anybody who's turned on the news for a minute at any point in the last, starting in August, right, knows what's up for the general election. And so this idea, that you have that somebody with a message that's a little bit different who could inspire people who wouldn't necessarily bother to vote. I mean, that's just a much more plausible argument for a general election than for a primary. Like, you're going to get this, like you said, this much more middle class and much more partisan identified group of people.
And I'd also an allergy vote.
yeah, exactly. And I also really want to hit this home too, because everything that they did to stop Bernie Sanders from winning was on this hope that Biden somehow had these, this incredible ability that he was going to be able to pull in this moderate vote, that he was going to be able to win the suburbs, that he was going to be able to win Florida, that everything about Bernie Sanders was a liability. And what we have seen in these past 2 days is that every advantage that they argue that Joe Biden had over Bernie Sanders, because that was an argument towards the end, right? It wasn't even just that hey, we're not even saying Joe Biden's better, but we just think that you have to vote for Biden, even if you like Bernie, because he'll be able to, to deliver in a way that Bernie Sanders can't. All of that was a lie, and they were wrong, dead wrong.
I specifically heard the argument that Bernie is a problem for down ballot candidates because he puts them into positions they don't want to. like 100% Bernie would have turned out more for the down ballot. I think that's where you would have seen the key difference. You wouldn't have had Biden doing this thing that just gives license to people who are just going to vote for him and F the rest of the ballot. I mean, I think like I said, I think the fact that this was such an unprecedented turnout is something I think we do have to keep in mind. Like, people were really motivated to turn out against Trump. I think like that's what I would emphasize in that. I think the Democratic Party is going to emphasize like, hey, look at what we did. We set records for turnout for our and for the guy who beat Bernie. So I do think we need to be smart about how we talk about these things, but fundamentally you got to keep focused on the down ballot disaster, because that is so consequential for, I mean, redistricting particularly. All these states, we're not going to have the ability to, and we're just going to have to, these obstacles are just bigger because of that.
Do we have any news coming in about what's going on?
It's looking pretty static right now. I mean, the Michigan and the Wisconsin calls were huge. It's still looking like Arizona and Nevada are looking strong for Biden. And, if that happens, then
You're muted, Matt.
I was just saying that's basically ball game. I mean, I think what I would say is happening now is Trump. I think Trump was talking about this election stealing scenario and so publicly because he's trying to lock the Republicans into it. Because I think they probably have a lot of these sort of explicit discussions behind the scenes, and Trump's like, okay, that's why we're doing the Supreme Court now. Okay, like he literally, that's why he mentioned it in the context of Amy Coney Barrett. I think somebody must have talked to him like, oh, this is really going to be really good for election. I think secretly McConnell and the rest of them are thinking like, oh, we got these judges. We're not going to blow this on getting you over Biden, especially when we still control the Senate. Like, I think that's where we are. I hope that's where we are, because I think if the Supreme Court stepped in and say, actually, we're done here, and I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think, frankly, it's close enough for that. I think, I thought that Biden was going to win bigger, but I think what we did lately especially with the Joshua Kahn Russell episode, I think we did it pretty close. Like, if you told me what I know now then, I wouldn't have been surprised, right? The early disappointment in Florida was scary last time, but I again, I'm rambling. I've been doing,
Yeah, you've been on for 80 hours straight.
No, I mean, I think we'll have to, continue watching and, be vigilant. And obviously, what they're trying to do right now is disgusting. I think the real reckoning is going to have to be what they did down ballot. I think their inability to be able to flip the Senate is a real indictment on their political abilities. And I don't know, and
to lose, just to lose ground in the House. And which is horrible, but the only thing we got to take from it is now the concentrated core of the squad is bigger, and we got to figure out a way to throw that weight around somehow.
What's the Republican squad like? Mitch McConnell, Collins.
It's
who's there?
That's the difference. Like the like hardcore intransigent Republicans are just the Republicans,
right?
It's not this like squad of like 4 people who are opposed to the party leadership.
An army.
yeah,
Totally.
Oh man, well, I think unless you'll have anything else, I think we're all sort of in the same position.
Yeah. So so what should we tell people for the rest of the week? No post game tonight. I think we'll do some more streams as things develop.
I think that's sort of the plan. We'll definitely just sort of, it's all touch and go. We're watching this happen and unfold, and try our best to let everybody know. But we'll definitely do a couple streams this week as we're seeing results come in. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Honestly, having spent so long over these past few months talking this election out, it feels really good to have you here. Thank you so much, Leisha and Matt. We got crazy times ahead, but I'm happy to be doing it with y'all.
Absolutely. Oh, and I just want to say one thing quick. both David and I were on Give Them an Argument this week. So if you want to go check out that from before the veil of this election, you can go check that out. But yeah, folks, we will see you.
Matt's been on twice. David is on every single week. So.
David is coming up with his own arguments inside of the argument. Ben, I heard you mention on some platform that your brother is a screenwriter or works in Hollywood, and something about how, you know, like the writing for like 2020, like, you know, it's just like bad. And I was meaning to tell you, there was a panel when Trump got elected with all the showrunners of all the political shows, and they pretty much all had to scrap their seasons because after what happened in real life during 2016, all the TV was really boring and like not as like insane. And so I was going to side text you that, but I figured I'd share that with the entire internet.
That's good.
Yeah, no, totally. Because what happened in real life, like if you didn't, like you wouldn't do it in a show because it's so like hacky and obvious and melodramatic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That, you know, it's like, no, come on, tone it down a little bit. Nobody's going to believe that.
Oh my God. The season finale of Trump just letting his supporters die in the snow because the check doesn't cash for the buses to get them, and then he complains about being out there.
The willingness of the Trump campaign to make their current supporters single use has just been amazing.
Yeah, that is very true.
So I mean,
an anecdote.
Okay, let's. I know we want to get out of here, but I just want to enjoy. You know, this thing I've been obsessed about is what is it? James Austin Johnson, the comedian who does this Trump impression. We played it on the show before, but I just want to enjoy this all. He's talking about, you know, people changing the counts and some problems with that. So let's enjoy this, and then we'll say goodbye for once and for all.
We reached the Elite Four. We beat the Elite Four, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the game. But there are people in this country who are going to tell you that you have not beaten the game until you have caught them all. Until you have caught them all. And it's a terrible deal. It's a really bad deal. It is very bad. You are disenfranchising a lot of people when you tell them that they have not finished the game until they've caught them all, because frankly there are too many Pokemon left to be acquired by trading. As far as I'm concerned, if the Pokemon is acquired by trading and it's not caught in the original game, it's not a real Pokemon, okay? And by the way, when they keep moving the goalpost, it used to be 151, and that was fine with everybody. They said 151 is all right with me. Like, of course, it should end with Mew. It should end with Mewtwo, and then it.
Okay, so
good.
So good. Michael would have loved that.
Yeah, he definitely would.
I think we're all missing him extra yesterday and today. So
Absolutely.
Shout out to everyone who messaged me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Well, yeah. On that note, we will see you hopefully with a new president-elect and you know, a new era, and we can leave this winter.
A new era of an old era.
Yeah, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, sort of thing. And until then, I've not.
You don't have a good sign off. Yeah.
I have a cheer.
Let's see.
When you die, may you go to heaven for an hour before the devil knows you're dead.
That's
my sign off.
There we go. Yeah. Take care, everybody.